Apologies about the slight delay there. Um, we had to get a hacker pose on, which you'll see the photos of later.
Yeah, I'll upload them onto Twitter. Watch this space because those photos are just, you won't have seen anything like it before in your life.
Elite hackers. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, but it's been a while.
it's been a
Been
long time.
Yeah, I think with Christmas and goodness knows what else, we've all been very busy. So, but it's great to be back. And thanks for
Yeah.
joining me again, Lisa. It's always lovely to have these sessions with yourself and everyone tuning in. So maybe start off like provide a bit of an update, like what you've been up to.
Oh God, like this is going to make me sound insane. Um, so I went to Mongolia in the winter and I stayed with a family in a yurt in the middle of nowhere in Mongolia, basically by myself for Christmas. That's what I did. That's what I did for fun. Yeah, so I did that, which was interesting. Mongolia is a very interesting place. Didn't know much about it going in, so didn't have lots of preconceived ideas. But what I did have was not correct. And so yeah, very interesting country. Then I went ice climbing in China. So I literally went to middle of nowhere China, just got on a train and kind of went. So that was interesting. And again, China was an interesting place because it was somewhere that I had a lot of preconceived ideas about, most of which were completely wrong. And I realized, actually had quite an interesting realization when I was in China, that despite the fact that I come on podcasts like this and, you know, you and I talk a lot about it and everything else about making sure that I'm not consuming propaganda, that I'm pretty impartial, that I'm not just consuming stuff and not questioning it. I was always quite proud of the fact that I thought I was doing quite well. When I went to China, I realized, no, not at all. You haven't done well at all. You've consumed all of the propaganda. um, so that was a bit of a interesting realization, I suppose. And then yeah, just traveling around, work, stuff like that. Really been sort of crazy busy. How about yourself?
Um, yeah, work, and more work.
Yeah,
It's
you've been
it's
very
great.
busy.
Yeah, it's just been insane at the moment. Um, Things like audits and all of that, which are lovely to go through, and assessments and all of that. But yeah, I thought last year would come, like, finish the year, start off the year smoothly, ramp up. Nope, start the year with a big bang, and it's not stopped since. So it's great. Hey,
Yeah.
keeps us on our toes. Unfortunately, I'd love to go explore into that like you, but yeah, that's kind of a little bit difficult with children.
It wouldn't be suitable for children. That's for sure. That would be miserable as an experience. It was miserable for me and I didn't go with children. So yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Plus, I imagine fairly expensive.
It wasn't actually expensive. Mongolia is incredibly cheap, and so is China. In terms of like eating and doing stuff, it's far, far cheaper. Even flying there is really cheap. So it
Oh,
wasn't really that expensive. Mongolia is like minus 45 in the winter.
yeah,
So, I mean, it's not that
equipment
fun,
wise, yeah, I'm
equipment
sure
wise. And
the kids would love a little bit of frostbite here and there. What's a little bit of frostbite?
character building.
Yep. No, that's exciting. You got it. I think you got some new adventures lined up as well, haven't you?
Yeah, always. Haven't announced quite the shenanigans that I'll be getting up to in the summer, but yes, more of the same, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm going to be very exciting. More work. I'm living on the edge, but yeah. Um, so I guess let's dive into the first topic that we have. I'm just reading on the phone because my memory is just rubbish. Um, so I think I really like this topic because it's quite interesting and understanding people's perspective on this. So if you're on the chat, please chime in. It's good to get other people's perspective on this as well. So this is about why people don't care about security still.
Hmm.
So we have a lot of obviously high impacts, high visibility incidents. I mean, just today, turned out Marriott weren't encrypting things like they said they were. I don't know if you've seen that.
Shocked. Absolutely shocked.
So they said they encrypted some of the data with AES 250, AES 128, I think it was. It's not terrible. But it turns out they weren't doing that. They were using SHA-1, which I still can't wrap my head around because I don't know how they would reverse the value to get the plain text. You're talking about passport numbers and that. So don't know how that works out. But anyway, that's what they were doing. So you got to have visibility incidents like this. Why do we think that people and organizations don't take security seriously?
I think it's a really interesting question, and someone put this forward to me to discuss today, and I was thinking about it, and I think there's a couple of elements to it. I think for a start, it's quite easy to forget that as InfoSec, we're in our own echo chamber, and we follow each other, and we like each other's stuff, and we're discussing stuff. And I sort of feel that it almost gives the illusion that we are communicating about security issues. But the problem is that the people who aren't in the security bubble aren't following those accounts and aren't involved in those conversations. And so you miss out on that. And you sort of, I think you sort of forget that you're kind of getting into this silo thinking mode. And yeah, you're not really seeing the true picture. In my experience as well, I think people still sort of believe that A, it probably won't happen, and B, certainly when it comes to ransomware, they can just buy their way out of it. It's just a business risk that you can budget for, which on some level it sort of is. The problem is it's not just ransomware. That's not the only threat that we face. So it sort of doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think also there's in essence a lack of accountability with some of the executives. So it's the company paying that ransomware, it's the company that's paying the fine. But that's changing. So with the likes of NIST and DORA, for those who don't know, those are sorry, not NIST, NIS, NIST 2. Don't know what that stands for. Bad with acronyms. But for those who don't know, those are regulations from the EU that are, well, DORA is actually here, but there's a grace period that ends in January next year. And then NIST 2, the local countries have to make up their own law by October this year. So I don't know when that's actually going to come into force in this too. But DORA will start taking force from January next year. And the interesting thing about those is there's not only a fine for the company, but there's fine for individuals in that company. So you're talking people like the CEO and potentially the CISO. So they will be personally fined, well, potentially fined. Do you think that's going to make a difference?
No. And the reason I say that is I think we've been here before. And I think the problem you have is that the problem is now so woven into the world and how we do business that I'm actually quite skeptical that regulation can change that. I think we've seen this so many times. I mean, there was so much hope with GDPR.
Yeah.
Everyone thought GDPR was going to be like the silver bullet for cybersecurity, and it's done basically nothing. Essentially, in my opinion, it's done basically nothing. People see it as a tick box, like there's things you have to do to comply with GDPR, and obviously you have to report certain things to the ICO, but people aren't really taking that sort of so seriously that they're changing their entire culture because of it.
Well, even like probably BA is maybe not a good example because, well, no, were they fined under GDPR? Was that before? I can't remember. But their fine got squashed significantly. I think that was under GDPR. Yeah, it would have been under GDPR because GDP before GDPR, the biggest fine was like 500,000, and they were getting fined like millions and millions, and it just got like squashed
Yeah.
to like a tiny fraction of what it is, which is
So,
kind of defeating the whole point.
I think there's two elements to it. There's the regulation, but then the regulation has to have teeth, and that those teeth have to be on the regulator. So if the regulator isn't then empowered in some capacity to issue fines and to really go down hard on organizations, then the regulation doesn't matter. And that's what we saw with GDPR. You had a really good, solid data protection regulation. I have no issue with it as it is. The problem was that the people who are enforcing it aren't enforcing it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what's written on that piece of paper at that moment in time, in my opinion. So I think really until we start, I think either the regulators have to start coming down really hard and be prepared to essentially cause companies potentially bankruptcy level issues. Unless they're prepared to do that, I sort of feel like a lot of these regulations just don't end up biting in the way that they ought to.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, if you're not going to enforce a regulation, it's not really a regulation, right? It's just some stuff written on a piece of paper that, yeah, it's the same as like policies and procedures. I've seen it like, yeah, we got this policy. Well, great. Do you enforce it? No. Well, what's the
Exactly.
point? It's totally meaningless then.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so yeah, it's. But one thing I have seen that I've really been encouraged by, certainly in my since I started my role at my current company, is companies are starting to ask more and more difficult questions. Which maybe it's just the sector that my company is in, but I do feel that at least some companies are now starting to ask more of their service providers, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that might help change things. Where if you're providing a service, you may no longer get away with just not doing things that you should be doing or trying to do the absolute bare minimum. So
Yeah.
my hope is something like that might also help change. So you no longer have this notion of security is a block in that. Security could literally make or break a sale.
Mm.
So it becomes an enabler in a large sense. So that's my hope where it goes, because at the end of the day, I think that's how we're going to really win, is if security helps make money.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think often so obviously for those of you who don't know, my job is to go into really large multinational companies and help them build sort of incident response programs, essentially. So plans, playbooks, teams to handle a cyber incident if it were to happen. And one of the things I see time and time again is you talk to the CFO of these big companies and they see a lot of it as like just financial risk in the way that you'd see a fraud fine or something like that, in that you set money aside to pay a ransom and to pay off the ICO, and then that's fine. Like, and if that is cheaper
Yep.
than implementing the security controls, you've got to understand that from a CFO's perspective, it's literally a balance sheet. It's a comparison between money in and money out and what that costs and what this costs. So until those fines are really substantial, I mean,
Yep.
I probably would do the same thing if it was my bank account. So
Yep. Profit at the end of the day.
I have to say one thing, and this really sums this up. Holly Grace Williams, if you don't know her, she's fantastic. She's a pen tester, and she said to me once, we were talking, it was not security related, but we were talking about where we can park our cars, and she turned around to me and she said, well, you can park your car anywhere. And I said, well, no, you can't, you're not allowed to park there. And she's like, yeah, it's just that parking space costs you £80 because you'll get a fine. And I thought that is spot on. That is how companies look at risk. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but that's going to
Yeah.
cost you this in fines.
Yeah, that's a really good way at looking at it. Just reading some of the comments. So one from Andy Holmes is the good guys comply with these regulations. The bad guys don't. Very true. Bad guys don't care about regulations. What are those?
Yeah.
And then another one from sorry, bad day. Cecil Agnew. Been a long day. Policies need to be enforced, and non-enforcement should be punished. You can write on paper whatever you want. It tells you nothing. Yep, totally agree.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, yeah, it's it's going to be an interesting time. I especially think with like DORA and this, and then you got the Cyber Resilience Act coming out as well. I don't know when exactly that's going to be in place. The CRA, also from the EU. Hopefully it'll change, but as you said, things like GDPR, yeah, it in reality it didn't do much. And as we, in fact, with the likes of Marriott, where you got these complaints, past PCR, yay, a past PCR, and in reality they still got breached and had all these things because many people don't realize like assessors have limited time; they can't go through everything, so they often rely on things. So yeah. Um, yeah. So that anything else on that topic?
No, I think the other thing, and Mike Thompson, one of my good friends, he usually brings this up as well. I think the other thing that really complicates matters here when we talk about security is vendors over promising what things can do and saying, for example, oh well, this is 100% ransomware proof, and it's basically like a little box with lights on it that does absolutely nothing, that just sits in your server room or something like that. And I think this is the problem, right? Because then you get into this sort of race to the bottom with vendors on what over promising, under delivering, potentially. It's not all vendors. But then you end up with this really murky landscape for people to decide what they are going to implement and what they're not, and what's good and what's not becomes quite a blurry line. So I think we need to address it from all sides. You've got to have the regulation, you've got to have the enforcement from the regulators, you've got to have the companies wanting to actually be more secure, and then you have to have the vendor ecosystem being more responsible. And unfortunately, if you only attack one piece of that pie, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think with the vendor space, there's two problems to that. One, um, sometimes the people choosing the vendor don't entirely know that area or problem space. So they're easy to blow over and say, yeah, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. When in reality, it probably misses a few things. And the other thing is tech, technology. Oh, techie, must have. And you never actually fully test it to make sure that it works in your environment. Yeah, it may work in some other environment, but it may not work in your environment. So that's why unless I've used the product really extensively before, I typically at least want two bake-offs between two vendors to make sure that the product does what it delivers and within the environment that it can. Yes, it's going to take more time, but I tell you what takes more time. Trying to convince your CFO to spend more money on a new product and explaining why the other bunch of money that you've just spent doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and then still have to implement it. So, yeah, do your homework. But yeah, really, really good point on that one. So the other topic was also a really good one. Disinformation. So I think we should clarify misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation is when someone gives inaccurate information unwillingly. So they don't necessarily understand or know that information's not accurate. It's not purposely giving out false information. Disinformation is purposely giving out false information. So there is a distinction to make between they both are incorrect information. The one's targeted, purposely given it, and the other is kind of mistakenly given it out.
Yeah, and I think the key thing that people forget about disinformation is the disinformation that you are vulnerable to is the disinformation that plays into your bias, not the stuff that you're against. So the stuff that you're against, you're not going to fall for. the stuff that really plays into what you think is true in the world, that's what you're going to be manipulated with. And that's the big problem, because it's very, very easy to spot and critique stuff that doesn't fit your narrative. But when it fits your narrative, it's almost impossible to do anything about. Now, interestingly, Peru has adopted this really interesting technique for this. So back in COVID, they had a problem with disinformation, as everyone did, and they decided to criminalize it. So what they did was they said, if you are caught spreading, interestingly, disinformation or misinformation, you will get a prison sentence if you spread that and it's false. If you spread it and it's false and it causes or is linked to public panic or hysteria, you'll get a really long sentence. So they claim this has worked absolutely marvelously and has driven the amount of disinformation that they're having to deal with down. How they're enforcing it, I don't know. Are you just imprisoning anyone who retweets something? I don't know. But they claim it's been very effective. So there you go. If you spread disinformation in Peru, you're in trouble. And I see all the pineapple on pizza comments, so don't think I haven't noticed. I was just not going to dignify it with
Yes, and I do
Scott
like
McGreedy
pizza.
here.
I do like pineapple on pizza. It's lovely. I do draw the line at coleslaw though. That's just wrong.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't redeem you, to be honest. So no. Has Sean?
Let's try this again. There we go.
He does this every time, and he claims that it's the internet connection. But every time we get into this, he cuts me off.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'll teach you pineapple on pizza. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. That's weird. It kind of just cut off.
yeah, so weird.
Yeah, it's like my computer disconnected and reconnected. I don't know what's going on. But yeah,
Gerard makes a good point. He said that it might be worthwhile for Peru as a discouragement, sort of saying like, look, if you don't check the veracity of something you're about to share, you're probably going to go to jail, which, to be fair, is quite extreme. I probably would start checking stuff before I posted it.
Isn't that like kind of a form of disinformation there in itself?
I don't know. I don't know how it works. They say it's very successful. Great for them. Good for you, Peru. If that's what's working for you, great.
Yeah, but it is interesting, like seeing a lot of the stuff, and in a way, it's interesting with, if you compare these days to the likes of in history. I'm not going to go repeat which parts of history. People can maybe work that out for themselves. Just examples where disinformation is often largely associated with propaganda, right? So you're trying to sell your bits or your ideology, and then sowing seeds of disinformation, and then also maybe relying on misinformation on that. And that was in the past. You probably could be forgiven. Like there wasn't the internet, you could go do some research or look up something. Surely in this day and age, we should be have a better chance of overcoming that, because there's so much information out there that you can actually go do your research, read up on something, and actually make sure whatever it is actually some as relevant and accurate and that kind of thing. That's the way I always look at it.
Yeah, I think there's been some interesting ideas mooted. So one of the ideas was in the run up to the UK general election to have a rule that would enforce that you had to mark AI content as AI content. So this has been generated by AI, or this is an AI video, and not claim that it's true, which possibly. But again, the malicious actors aren't going to follow that. They're just going to be like, you're not going to say to KillNet, can you do this? And they're like, yeah, no problem, guys. Let us know if that's okay watermarking, or if you want it checked. Like, it's not going to happen.
Russia's going to do that to T, are they not? They're going to.
Yeah.
They're bored. North Korea.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think that that's going to be very effective. I do think that Twitter made some inroads in this, in the sense that they now write, like, if you try to share an article you haven't read on Twitter, it will say, "Are you sure you want to share this? You haven't read it." I think what would perhaps be more effective is when you shared it, it said, "Lisa has not read this article," underneath the retweet, because I do think that would sort of kind of say to people, look, maybe Lisa is just sharing stuff that looks like clickbait.
Yeah. Or ask you to add a little bit of context to the article as well, and then you can put two and two together. Yeah, it's uh it's
The
sorry,
comments.
just reading the comments. Um, it's oh gosh, I'm losing my mind there. I think it's also the social media aspect, likes, retweets, that kind of follows, that kind of thing. Which is unfortunate. You want to be the first one to share it to get like the likes and tweets and that. Well, that at least my kind of thinking of some of the stuff as well. Especially when it's a hot topic or something like that.
Mm.
Um, I mean, go look at the Baltimore Bridge, where
Oh God.
some of the stories come out of that, and then people will go and share all the stuff. That's probably
That
large.
story was just insanity. It went from, I mean, I think I basically saw that the ship had hit the bridge, and then I sort of walked away, made some coffee, did some work, whatever, came back to the story, and it had descended into, I don't even know what it was. It was basically like hackers had taken over the diesel tanks in the ship and had done this, and it was just bizarre. Like, people had made up an entire narrative essentially based off a film that they'd watched and kind of carried through it, and then it was just, I had to mute it in the end because it just ended up getting totally crazy.
Yeah, and I don't know what the angle on that was, like why people would maybe misinformation, probably disinformation, who knows? But it's
The
yeah, that
comments are descending into chaos on this disinformation. I'm just I can't read them out because I'm hoping if you're watching this after the fact, you won't be able to see the comments. But
I think that's
yeah,
saved in the history. Or I don't know.
great. So there'll be a record. So everything you say now is being logged. Everything is never forgotten on the internet, guys. You should know that by now.
Yeah. But it is interesting. There's also, yeah, and I guess it comes down to not even propaganda and all that kind of stuff, but also some of the tooling, some of the things that people put out to gain their own following and businesses and all that kind of
Hmm.
thing. So
Yeah,
that's why
and
I
I think
say,
there was a study done by MIT that was really interesting, that was talking about disinformation, and they discovered that the overarching emotion for sharing content on social media was disgust. Disgust was like the most powerful emotion. It wasn't anger, it wasn't anything, it was disgust. And I think actually, if you think about it, if you use that as almost like a human firewall rule, so that if you read a post and you instantly feel disgusted by it, that should put a massive red flag up that you need to go check it, because this is an emotion that's highly likely to be a disinformation emotion. So yeah, it was quite interesting to read, because I do think when you look at a lot of the campaigns, either in COVID or for elections, or even, to be honest, when someone gets hacked, a big company gets hacked, and you get loads of theories on why that was, again, it's all coming down to like very sensational language, disgust, shock. It's never just kind of analytical.
yeah, I mean, we saw that just today. I don't know if you saw that with the Qantas app, apparently giving out details of other people, and people immediately, oh, it's a cyber attack. Well, hold on. I think that's the other problem is people are very quick to jump to conclusions without waiting for the full
Mm-hmm.
details and information to come out. And it can create serious harm in that in our field. So one example is like the OpenSSL vulnerability, where everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be the world's worst," and all of that. And we hold on, wait, we've not seen what it is. Let's wait till we get all the details. Oh, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be like critical 10 and all that. And when it came out, it actually wasn't that much. But the problem is we then cry wolf too many times. And
Yeah.
then we ask, why do people not care about security? Well, we cry wolf every time. And then when an incident does come, it'll be like, well, yeah, the security people are crying about it again.
Yeah, and I get that as well with my friends who are not in security, and I'm sort of giving them tips of things they can do, and they literally just turn around to me now and just say, "Lisa, I don't care," and I'm like, "Okay, there's not much nowhere for me to go with that one, really. I guess that's a dead end." So, you know, I guess when you've got to that point, it's like, yeah, we've probably burnt this story one too many times now, and nobody cares anymore, and perhaps if we'd been a bit more restrictive with the ones we blew out of proportion and sent nuclear in the media, possibly people might care when something bad happens. But as it stands, they don't.
Yeah. And I guess they're also just tired of it. It's continuous. It's the same thing over and over and over and over and continuous where I mean, I'm even getting like, um, what's the word? I'm kind of immune to it, where it no longer registers as it first did. Like, yeah, another company got hacked. Normal day, carry on. Where like probably a good number of years ago, you're like, oh my gosh, they got hacked. Wow, this is big news. Where now it's like, yeah,
Mm. And I guess
happened.
linking that back to our first topic of why people don't care, if your CEO is constantly being told this company got hacked, that company got hacked, this company got hacked, that company got hacked, at some point he's just going to go, oh, well, I guess everyone's getting hacked, so therefore it's not that important anymore. Because if everyone's getting hacked, it doesn't matter as much, right? The thing that matters the most is if you're the only company in your industry that gets hacked, because then you're going to lose market share potentially. You're going to have costs skyrocket, share price drop potentially. But if everyone's getting hacked, that's not really the problem anymore, is it? So
Yep, exactly. So yeah, it's we'll see where that goes. Yeah, I guess it all ties in together.
just pulling back
And
from some of the
hopefully,
comments, yeah, AppSec bloke says repetition, just like most cyber topics, and that's also true because in conferences we have seen the same topics be brought up. I now have seen them for 5 years, the same conversations at the same events, year after year after year. And either if we're having those conversations, still the same exact conversations, we have not solved the problem, and these solutions don't solve the problem, because if they did, we would be having different conversations. And also, I just think you get to this point where you've just heard the story so many times. I mean, if you work in security, the number of times you've heard someone say culture has to come from the top down, I've heard that for 5 years and it still isn't happening. So, I mean,
yep,
evidence based. It's something's not working, right? So,
yep. What's a sign of madness? Is repeating the same thing and expecting different results.
yeah.
We we got to change who we speak to, how we speak to them,
Mhm.
and our approach. Because yeah, it's evident that it's not exactly working as we want. Um, cool. All right, and then on to our last topic, which is kind of ironic. We didn't even actually realize that plays into our first photo that we had.
Yes, it does. Watch my
Yeah,
Twitter. Imminently, there's going to be an epic photo going up that is just next level. Ironic or erotic?
definitely
I
not
think
erotic.
ironic, not
No, definitely not. Um, yeah, so
erotic.
hacktivists.
Yes,
Um,
activists.
yeah, I was trying to remember what the actual question was around that.
So I think that someone was asking that the issue that hacktivists basically now have quite an immense amount of power. And if they think, for example, the Israel-Palestine conflict, if they think your company is associated with Israel or Palestine, the hacktivists on either side can target that company to sort of get involved in the conflict. And that's what we're seeing a lot. We saw it with Russia, Ukraine. We're seeing it again in Israel, Palestine, big time, even more so than we did in Russia, Ukraine. And these are groups that aren't really state sponsored, particularly. They're obviously permitted on some level, but these groups are saying, okay, Sean's company, they do a lot of work with an Israeli company. We're a Palestinian activist group like Anonymous Ghost or whoever. And so we're going to DDoS your site, deface your website, whatever it is. They typically don't use ransomware. It's predominantly DDoS as the sort of MO. That's not to say that that's not hugely damaging into and of itself. And obviously, we saw some pretty interesting hacktivist activity when the Israel-Palestine conflict kicked off. For example, one group actually interfered with the alert app that the Israelis have on their phones for missile launches. And they actually interfered with it to notify them that I think a nuclear missile had been launched or something. And they were sort of messing around with that in order to kind of cause disruption, which is what hacktivists want to do. But I think the question was, you know, how we're not really talking about that, because if I'm a hacktivist and I deem that your company has dealings with whoever, let's say Palestine, then I have the sort of agency now to say, well, I've made this decision, I've got this power of God decision to interfere in this conflict and now go after you. So companies have to kind of think about geopolitical conflicts, even if they're not in a particularly geopolitical industry.
Yeah. I don't even think it's geopolitical. It could be even just different movements, not even
Yeah.
conflicts across. Look at the Occupy movement. I think, I forgot which group it was, but I'm pretty sure that during the time of the Occupy movement of the financial crash, there were a few hacktivist groups targeting
Yeah.
financial organizations.
Yeah, and you've seen what are they called? Extinction Rebellion. The environmentalists again going after law firms that work with oil and gas firms and things like that. So it's sort of almost a lawless situation that we found ourselves in. And these people are harder to deal with, I would argue, than ransomware groups, because ransomware groups, they want to negotiate, they want to get paid, there's a dialogue. But these people don't want to be paid. They're not interested in money. They literally just want to cause maximum disruption to you.
Yeah, and essentially for you to go away or stop.
Yeah, in a perfect world.
Yeah, in the bigger context. So, and it causes disruption, and it like I get maybe some of the thinking behind it, but at the end of the day, most people working for those organizations are ordinary people who have
Mm.
no decision making, and you are causing harm to ordinary people. Yes, they may be working for an organization that you don't agree with, but those people generally, I would like to think, decent people, um, unless the company's doing really bad stuff, which maybe in some countries. But
Like you work for Blackwater or something.
yeah, like I mean, really, really, really dark and bad things. Most of the people would be ordinary people like you and I,
Mhm.
and it has a negative impact on those people. So just think, a way that you could target organizations, but you'd limit the the danger to ordinary people. I
Mm.
don't know. It's a difficult one. Um, And yeah, it my view is always it's better to protest peacefully. Um, as soon as you start causing damage, you kind of do damage to your own cause. You're not you kind of now give an excuse for why people should be against your viewpoints, and that if you start down the damage and violence route,
Mhm.
you're not having a dialogue and having a conversation about it.
Gerard says, how much tangible impact have hacktivists managed to make in the long run for these companies? I think long run, well, I would argue we haven't seen long run yet because we're still a few years in. However, I would say that it will probably almost certainly be financial, because if you target for example, just to use a recent example, if you target, I think Anonymous Ghost are one of the biggest Palestinian-based hacktivist groups. And when the Israeli-Palestine conflict happened, they took a whole load of Israeli media outlets offline. And they didn't take them, I think they only took them off for 2 or 3 days. It wasn't a very long time at all. But in the cycle of the media, that's a really long time. And that will cost you money. It costs you money in loss of revenue, but it also costs you money in sort of beefing up your defenses post-incident. It costs you money in kind of getting everything back online. It costs you time and resourcing and manpower and everything else. So I don't think there's probably a really long-term impact, but I do think that it's probably larger than we would think in terms of financial issues.
Yeah, that's the thing that people always forget. It's the cost of a incident is not just the incident; it's the whole thing around the incident.
I'm just looking up. AppSec Blokes just said, "Is it terrorism?" So just out of interest. So apparently, the definition of terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. So I suppose like the problem there is that it's not really it's obviously unlawful, but it's not really violence against civilians. It would be more, I guess, like that. It comes down to that definition of violence, really, doesn't it? And I don't think a lot of our legislation really encompasses
or
things.
intimidation. So in a sense, I kind of view it as more a form of intimidation.
Yeah, I think it's more intimidation.
So could maybe fit the bill. I don't know. That's where I don't make those calls. That's where the lawyers come in.
You don't make the calls? I thought you were responsible for global terrorism laws, Sean.
No, hell no. I'll run a mile away from that. There's a reason why I don't stick. It's like anything in work comes up with law based. I'm like, nope, over to the lawyers, please. I'm not making any judgment calls on that because often the language is so open to interpretation that you can get it really wrong. I don't want to do that. So even like compliance and that. So I'm like, nope.
I wonder whether the reason they don't label it as terrorism is because there's actually no way for them to handle it. And if you look at how the response to 9/11 and, you know, the war on terror that Western countries have partaken in for years, there's a sort of an obvious media worthy way of dealing with that. You know, if you then classified hacktivism as terrorism, you'd have to be like, we can't do anything about this. This is nothing we can, you know, that we have no tools to take it down. And that would look very bad from a PR perspective for those agencies. So it could also be partially like our inability to handle it means that we want to soften the definition of it.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess that's where the lawmakers, and at the end of the day, I don't think the criminals care too much.
No.
They're certainly, but it is an interesting take on it.
But it would mean, but what would be interesting is obviously if they were classified as terrorists, the funding issue would be interesting because now a lot of these hacktivist groups crowdfund in order to get money to do the operations that they do. If they were classified as terrorists, you'd be funding terrorism, which would be prohibited. So that would be a different change. That would be one thing that I think would make perhaps a difference.
It's interesting.
The problem is you're then basically classifying activists as terrorists. And that's quite a difficult thing for a government to do without massive blowback, I'd have thought.
Yeah, I guess that maybe that's where they draw the line and just accept it. Because to me, in my view, it kind of sounds like it could fit the bill, but then yeah, as you say, you could create all sorts of problems. Yeah, so it's probably a route down a very dangerous path. So it's a balancing act, perhaps at the end of the day. Yeah, some good comments there in the chat.
Yeah, really good comments. I've just been reading them. Would it make people hesitate to engage in it? Yeah, I definitely think it would, because a lot of people don't want to be. It's one thing to be classified as an activist, which has some level of cool attached to it, but to be classified as a terrorist tends not to be something you open with at a dinner party.
I don't even know what my response would be. I'm like, oh, I got to upset Tammy. I'm gonna go home now. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm out of
Yeah.
here. But yeah, it's interesting world that we live in. But yeah, I think those are all the topics that we have. Anything else to add? Any?
No, I think we covered all of them. And I just say to everyone, like, please, if there's stuff you want to discuss and debate, and obviously your comments are great in the chat, but if there are topics for next time, please send them to myself or Sean, because all of the topics today we didn't come up with, they were contributed by other people. So it really makes a big difference because it makes us think. And sometimes they're really difficult, really difficult ones to answer. Like, why don't people care about security? I don't know. It's
Big
sad.
kiss. Big kiss for that tech bloke.
Mwah.
Um, yeah, no, very on point. Like, because we know everything about security, right? Like everything,
Everything. We
everything.
can talk about AI. We can talk about nuclear power. If you have questions about that, drop those in. We can do that as well. Sean's won awards actually in nuclear power, so he's
Power station doesn't exist anymore, but
destructive
uh,
testing. Yeah, it
easy
was
bloke.
fun. I enjoyed
But
it.
yeah, no, it was great. It's great to come back. Great topics. Yeah, echoing what Lisa said. Thanks for the topics. Does make things a bit more interesting, um, or hopefully more interesting for you as well. And we'll be back next month with some other
Definitely.
topics that get chosen by you all.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks for joining. Great hanging
Thanks,
out with
everyone.
you all. Thanks for the engagement in the chats as well.
Okay. Bye.
See you later. Bye.